Um, so we'll start with Michael Hayford. Michael Hayford is the CEO of Lighthouse Strategies, and he's been in executive management positions of both public and private companies ranging from $10 million to $150 million in annual sales. And he serves as CEO of Lighthouse Strategies and their 10 subsidiaries and affiliates, inclusive of Las Vegas Relief, Silver State Wellness, San Diego Relief Research, Wellness Center, U.S. Coffee and Tea Pod, and a whole bunch of other companies that they've just been on a tear. And then we've got Mason Hembry, who's the president and co-founder of Dad and Dudes International. He's an award-winning restaurateur and has led research and development and compliance and public relations for cannabis-infused craft beers. Then we've got Michael Taylor, who is the CEO of Green Flash Brewing Company, formerly with AB InBev, and a senior executive with 20 years of commercial and financial operations experience. Then we have Victor Yerez, who's formerly of Pernod Ricard. Victor was with William Grant & Sons, which is the third largest Scotch whiskey player globally and owner of a lot of premium spirits brands. And previously, up until 2016, he was the global director of corporate strategy and M&A for the number 2 wine and spirits player worldwide, Pernod Ricard. And so we're real excited to have Victor with us. And then moderating today's panel is Brian Shang, general partner in Arcview Ventures. He was one of the first investors in Ease and served on their board up until this latest big round, and had his own venture firm, Fresh VC, which invested in technology companies. And so we're very, very excited to have the panel with us. Take it away.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Troy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Shang, and we have a great panel of esteemed guests today. So why don't we just first start off with a little bit of background and maybe, obviously Troy gave an introduction, but maybe a little bit on your journey so far in the cannabis beverage sector, a little about the companies you're involved with. Michael, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So Lighthouse Strategies began our brands and beverage development back in 2016, actually as a result of seeing Constellation Brands CEO Rob Sands at the time touring MJ BizCon in 2015. Shortly after that, saw an article about him being interviewed at MJ Biz, and in January of 16, they acquired Ballast Point Brewery. And when I saw that happen, I saw those three things come together, and I said, well, what did I just see happen? What's going on? And so I took a look into the craft beer industry and big beer and realized that craft beer had eroded big beer revenues by about 30% over the last 10 years, and that large beer and large alcohol had been buying back their market share by acquiring the top craft brewers in the United States. And then I took that and said, well, what's that have to do with cannabis? And I took a look at some statistics that came out of Colorado that suggested that alcohol sales had fell to 27% by the after the first year of legalization in Colorado. Later, we found a report came out from 3 universities, a 10-year study on medical marijuana-only states, where they reported alcohol sales had fallen by 15%. And at that point, the light bulb went on in Q1 of 16 and said, we've seen this movie before, such as craft beer eroding big beer revenues, and now big beer and alcohol, we're looking at cannabis because cannabis was showing a 15 to 27% erosion rate on alcohol, and we began to develop our position then. Between 16 and today, we've developed BrewBuds, which is a patented single-serve coffee product and tea product. We've developed Two Roots Brewing, which is the world's first non-alcoholic cannabis-infused craft beer with rapid onset and rapid dissipation. And we've got coffees, teas on the ready-to-drink side. We've got mocktails and sparkling waters coming out over the next 4 months, and a series of other beverages.
Great. Mason?
My name is Mason. I'm actually the owner of Dad and Dudes Brewery in Aurora, Colorado. We opened in 2010 as just a traditional craft brewery and pizzeria. In 2015, we released the world's first CBD-infused alcohol-containing craft beer. And recently, we were acquired by Lighthouse Strategies, and we're very excited to be part of the team.
Don't forget that that has a TTB formulation approval and a pending patent.
Yes, the purchase did include the method for the production of the CBD infused beer.
Great. I'm Michael Taylor. I'm CEO of Green Flash Brewing Company. We're a traditional craft brewery and out of San Diego. So if anybody's down in San Diego way, there you go. I see some shouts out. Appreciate it. Appreciate the love. I got connected with Mike about June, July, after taking over the reins at Green Flash in May, and quickly began kind of a conversation about how we could benefit each other. And we have decided to put together a contract brewing agreement for Mike, and so his Two Roots brands that we're all drinking. This is the non-alcohol version, by the way, right now.
Non-infused.
Sorry, non-infused and non-alcohol. We decided to get into a contract brewing agreement and have begun to produce beer for Mike and the Two Roots family out of the San Diego brewery that we have, and really, it's been an impressive learning experience for us. I specifically didn't know much about the CBD or the THC market, and have been learning every day through the process. It's exciting to be on the forefront of something that is probably game changing for the alcohol beer industry, and proud to be here. Thank you.
So Victor Jerez, for the past dozen or more years, I've been at some of the top spirits companies in the world, first in operational general management positions, and then finally in corporate as head of corporate strategy and M&A. So when you hear big alcohol is coming, that would have been me. About 6 months ago, I went to MJ Biz Conference in Toronto and was astounded. But before that, I was astounded because the scale of the business was evident. But really, it validated a thesis that I was driving in the boardrooms of the companies that I was working in, that alcohol and cannabis will converge. It's a very similar need state. And yes, we're based in Paris, or I was based in London, very different attitudinally in Europe still than in the US. But what was happening in 2010, 2011, this was a tectonic shift in California with the Proposition 64 coming through. Finally, after that experience in Toronto over the summer, I said, you know what? If I don't move now, it's going to be too late. So a few months later, I'm up on stage with Michael, and I got to give a shout out to Arcview, because it was through the meeting of these wonderful people that now I've decided to join the team here. So shout out to Arcview. And just to find, thank you, Steve. And for me, this panel is crucial because, and we'll talk about this more, but how does the normalization of consumption occur? And I think that beverages will be one of the key vectors towards that.
And that's really one of the things I really like about this panel. It's a really affiliated panel. It really shows the the growth of the cannabis beverage sector. We have a growing supply chain, with acquisitions of the traditional brewery. We have contract fulfillment, and then we also have an executive from a well-known alcohol company that's joining a new a new leader in the cannabis beverage sector, and really goes to show the kind of companies that are now emerging. That just a few years ago, on Arcview stage, we were just hearing about these products for the first time. But let's dive into the topics. Why are we having this panel in the first place? What's so special about cannabis beverages? To your point, Victor, cannabis beverages versus other segment of the cannabis edibles sector. What's different? What's the benefits? Why are we doing this?
I'll just jump right in there. I think that first thing is, when you think about normalization of consumption, right? There's rejectors out there, for example, my wife, who just can't deal with the smell. And even the vape, she doesn't want to put things into her lungs. She doesn't find that healthful. There's a broad move within the alcohol industry, and we were talking about it in the boardrooms all the time. Low, no well. Lower alcohol, no alcohol. So there's some products out there that are no alcohol spirits. How does that work? I'm not quite sure. And wellness. And these are big, broad trends which are moving throughout the population. So I think beverages adult beverages, that's a repertoire which is well understood. Well understood. And there's codes around that in terms of dosing beer versus wine versus hard spirits. And I think alcohol, de-alcoholized alcohol infused with THC plugs right into the routines of consumption of beverages, of adult beverages, and also plays into the broader trend of low, no, well, very effectively.
Right. So what does the future of the cannabis beverage sector look like? Mason, you want to take that?
Well, we're definitely seeing a lot of growth trends in craft beer as far as taking away from big beer. But obviously, innovation's always been key. Innovation is the very reason why we came out with CBD-infused craft beer in 2015, because we saw since 2012, obviously Colorado had created recreational marijuana and given us opportunity to see its impact on our industry, and we saw innovation as key. And what we're seeing is a complete different change in demographic from the traditional craft beer consumer, which was traditionally millennials. They drove all the consumer sales, but now I'm seeing baby boomers, and even the greatest generation is now consuming our beer because it's something that they're familiar with, and I do see continued growth there.
But where are we at today? So, we've heard a lot of big industry news with over the past few years, Constellation. We've heard, different alcohol companies moving into the space. End of 2018, ABI struck a partnership with Tilray. But if you look at the data today, right, there's the cannabis beverage sector still makes up a relatively small percentage of sales, even in states that have legalized for several years. Where are we today, and how does that fit into the big picture of this disruption that we're talking about?
Well, I think first we have to kind of understand what fit is, right? So what is fit? There's nowhere you're going to go as a consumer and they're going to serve you one size of everything or one flavor of everything. And when we look at the cannabis industry today, where we're leaving is an area where you had very few choices, right? When you look at cannabis, you could say 55 to 75% of revenues are driven by flower. But the average store is carrying 20 to 40 strains of flower. If I look at the stores we own, flower, any one SKU of flower is between 1.3 and 1.6% of revenues, not 55%, right? Because there's a lot of SKUs. The outlying SKU is 2.02% of revenues. So with beverages only having one or two SKUs in a store, is it realistic to think it's going to become 20, 30, 40, 50% of revenues? It's an impossibility. So with the data that we can actually gain now today in our own stores and through some of our closer retail partners, is we can see that with a broadening of the SKU base, we get greater sales. So in our store, beverages is 5% revenues. In our store, 10% of all SKUs sold are Two Roots Brewing because there's a choice. IPA, lager, stout, hef, blonde, and legacy beverages. So we have to give the consumers choice. When we give them choice, we're going to get fit. When we get fit, we're going to integrate within their lifestyles, right? A lot of people don't like beer. So what about beer analogs, right? So we have to be looking left and right of that mark and make sure we give them choices. Because I think that in our projections, if we took the penetration rate, the sales through data from Nevada, where today Two Roots is the top 3 beverages sold in the state of Nevada, you're looking at a $25 billion retail market if you aggregate that across the United States.
Choice is great, Mike, but I do think it has to taste appropriate too, right? If it tastes like shit, no one's going to buy it, right? And in all seriousness, there's a benchmark that a non-alcohol beer has to compare itself, and that is alcohol beer. Non-alcohol beers traditionally have not had the same flavor profile, the same mouthfeel that alcohol beers have had. I think we're doing something differently here. When what really turned me around with our discussion is even trying some of the early test batches that Mike and his team have put together, and our ability to then work together and enhance the quality is, I think, the differentiator. So if you have a product that truly is a world-class product, and truly is understandable, like a beer that is an IPA, for example. I'm drinking a non-alcohol beer, right? I've had many non-alcohol IPAs, and not any of them have been as good as this beer is. If you have that taste profile that is amazing, you've got the opportunity to win the hearts and minds of consumers, and then the functional benefit becomes secondary to that as well.
So what's different this time around? Is it the brewing process with the non-alcoholic cannabis beer? Is it the specific product that is kind of a special ingredient to the company?
Well, it's really a combination of things, right? So the first part is committing that you could actually produce a non-alcoholic beer that tastes good. So I could quote a company who's brought a different product to market. It's a sparkling water. Their head brewer said, "There's no such thing as a quality craft non-alcoholic beer." He didn't find the technology we found. So we brought technology in the United States that had never been deployed in the U.S. That was step one. Step two is finding a really good brewer that could believe, right? Step three was understanding not only the technology and how to optimize technology for the product, but also optimize our brewing processes to work with that technology to give us the end product. And then the most important thing, and I think if we pay attention to what big alcohol is saying today, it's science, right? Because when we look at beverages today, like most edibles, it's 45 minutes to 2 hours for an onset. Our social settings can be over by the time an edible takes effect, right? Next thing you know, everybody's gone home, and now you're wearing the light shade on your head, and your wife's going, "What's going on," right? So we have to develop products. We have to embrace science that allows us as consumers to self-regulate like we did when we were younger, learning to consume alcohol. Why? Because alcohol has standards. Beer's on average 5% ABV. Wine has a standard. Alcohol has standards. When you consume over time, you establish your regulation, right? I think Victor said titrate more effectively, right? So I know that I can have 4 beers and I'm going to be functional. But if I had 4 edibles and it took 2 hours for them to hit me, I'm a train wreck at some point, right? So science is the key. Big alcohol is talking about it as the forefront. This doesn't work without rapid onset, and rapid dissipation. So the difference is high quality product with the right science for onset and dissipation.
Totally there. It has to taste good, first stop, and if it doesn't, you're going to have a rejector. But the other thing that we talk about in the spirits industry and the alcohol industry is sessionability, right? Because to drink one and be done, why? Okay, you want rotation of sales, so the science is absolutely critical. And on my test case of my wife, a rejector, and her friend, an absolute rejector, we were in Las Vegas. I said, "Try it. It's like a beer. It's very low dose. Try it." They loved it. And they said, "Oh, it's less calories than a beer? This works for me," right? So the product on my N+2 worked, right? And I think the sessionability is what actually differentiates beverages from the other edible categories. You got to realize that getting an elevated state, right? Of course, you have those low energy where you're at home, you're chilling out on the couch watching a movie. But it's also really nice to have a convivial moment with your friends. And fortunately, passing around a joint, there is that ritual. But are you going to break up pieces of chocolate and pass that around and wait 2 hours to get the effect? If you get the science right, you get the taste right, then you're sliding right into a well-established social ritual, right, of enjoying an elevated state together. And I think that, why is it very small right now? Because people haven't cracked the code in terms of science, in terms of taste.
Right, because if you take a look at the data, like when we ran the data on sales out of Nevada, we thought we would erode legacy beverages such as Dixie brands. It was very concerned. I shared that last year at one of the Arcview events. And what we found is that the Dixie Elixir sales stayed. And that consumer was different from the Two Roots consumer. So imagine that, a 100 milligram beverage that you consume in, 5 milligram, 6 milligram servings in a little cough syrup cup, right? That has a customer. It has a price point, and it has an application. They have high tolerance. They need more. So they want better value. Then you move over and say, well, Two Roots. Two Roots is selling 10 times that of a legacy product, and it costs 6 times as much. What is that telling you? It's the pleasure of consumption, right? So we had a chef tour our manufacturing center in Vegas, and as we were walking through it, I asked her, I said, when you prepare a meal for a group, Is it the effect that you're preparing for? She goes, what do you mean? I said, well, are you planning for everybody to be sitting back in their chair, unbuttoning your pants, going, oh my God, I can't eat another bite? She goes, of course not. It's about the flavors, the aromas, the textures, the pairings, the conversation, the pleasure of consumption, not what I felt like when it was done, right? Our industry is in the effect mode. It's the what. We have to get to selling the why, and that why is the experience.
So we focused a lot of this discussion so far on beer or beer-like products, but obviously that's not the only segment of cannabis beverages. And there's sort of a differentiation. We just talked about with Dixie Elixirs, but whether it's soda, cannabis-infused soda, coffee, shots, that's increasingly popular nowadays. What kind of data do we see, or what kind of insights do we have on these other parts of cannabis beverages versus just a cannabis beer?
I think it's funny, as Victor and I actually went to the beer industry summit and the wine and spirit industry summit just last weekend at the Hotel Del. And what I didn't know, because we've been in the beer industry for a year, right, from the Lighthouse perspective, is I didn't understand that how many analogs the beer companies actually own. So, my ignorance, I didn't know that Sam Adams owned Twisted Teas. I didn't know that they owned Angry Orchards. I didn't know that they owned Truly. And you start to look at that same type of a trend, right? Well, here's beer, but here's this, this, and this, right? So what are consumers looking for? They're looking for flavor. They're looking for low calorie. They're looking for good for you, right? So that's why we're seeing those analogs come across, because they want to get it under 100 calories. So whether it's Two Roots, which is between 70 and 100 calories a serving, if it's our Creative Waters products, where it's going to be in the 20s of calories, right? So you can get to flavor, you can get to healthy. It doesn't have to be beer. It can be a range. And we're now, as an organization, we're looking at how we're going to emulate the real world, where big companies that have $100 billion in revenue are trying to protect their revenue by creating these analogs. And cannabis is going to do the same thing. We're doing the same thing. We're going to create different flavors, different forms, different calorie counts, and different benefits to the consumer.
One of the questions I have, one of the niggling things in the back of my mind, is how this emerging industry deals with something that's very, very established within the alcohol industry, which is called LDA plus, right? What's that mean? Legal drinking age plus. Because what is the thing that can kill the alcohol industry? Regulation, right? And how is the quickest way to provoke the regulatory bodies? Selling your products, adult products, to kids, right? So one of the companies I was working for owned Malibu. Malibu is an entry point liquid, and the whole effort was to try and bring that above LDA plus. So one of my concerns around candies and sweet flavored drinks is that, it just exposes this emerging industry to quick regulatory clampdown. If we're talking about adult beverages, and I'm not talking about CBD, I'm talking about THC, right? Stupefactant, mind-altering, right? That is a choice that should be made by adults. And how do we position our drinks, and we're talking about drinks now, so that it's clearly, not just labels that a 6-year-old can't even read, but something that's clearly adult. That's
kids know not to reach into certain coolers at a barbecue, right?
That's true.
So what kind of regulatory hurdles do we face today, and how do we get in front of some of these hurdles that Victor, you just mentioned? We have to, as an industry, think ahead about how we're from the structuring of the product, the packaging, all the way to thinking about the actual distribution of the products. All of this falls within the scope of what you just mentioned, because it is developing. And we look at some of the regulations today. Actually a very specific example of certain ingredients that when flammable turn to carcinogenic chemicals in a beverage actually is approved as a safe food ingredient. So how do you guys think about the regulations as it is today and towards the future?
Well, I think if we take a look at regulators, we actually have to put ourselves in the shoes of regulators. So in Nevada, we actually have a super great working relationship with Nevada regulators, because someone writes the regs and then there's an enforcement agency that has to interpret them. And so, it's important for us to put ourselves in their shoes, interpret the regs as they would, and then look at how the real world is actually managing food safety, right? So in Nevada, the state came back to us based upon the speed of our output of our equipment and said, Mike, we know you can't get an FDA approval, but we'd like you to go and get an inspection, and we'd like you to establish a HACCP plan, Hazardous Assessment, Control, and Correction plan, so that we ensure safe products, right? So we have to evolve towards an FDA environment. And so our facilities constructed, our SOPs are consistent, and now we have a asset plan that we can be safe with, right? So as we look at cannabis, nobody that consumes cannabis really wants things that are going to be bad for you, carcinogens. Like, we don't put them in ours. We pasteurize our products, right? So they're safe. I don't need to put stabilizers in there because we're pasteurizing. So I think it's just about the industry. We're not going to be, putting things that are bad for people in our beverages, regardless if the law allows it.
More on the regulations front, Mason, well, actually, Michael mentioned before that there was a specific TTB related. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So when it comes to regulation and actually normalizing your industry specifically with THC containing products, some of the regulatory hurdles that we're seeing are involved with CBD directly, and obviously the Hemp Farm Bill did recently pass, and what we're seeing is another pushback from the FDA specifically. For interstate commerce to take part, with our product specifically, will require a little bit more push and guidance when it comes to the FDA, which is why I've pressured the Brewers Association actually to participate in the forum that they've already mentioned was going to be happening later this year, and bringing more, I guess, food and beverage guidance and requests as far as allowing CBD. And I think it's important to take note on CBD specifically because what we're seeing is education. My product was developed, and much to my surprise, it's offering an educational platform for the emerging market, because there are people that are curious but they're scared to try edibles or flower specifically. So if we could start with that regulatory hurdle and kind of push the FDA forward, I think we can push into THC for the future.
Were you asking about the actual TTB formulation approval?
Yeah, the actual approval itself, because one of the, with the passing of the Farm Bill, and you look at the data around what's, more popular and getting increased attention from consumers, one of the big sectors is really non-alcoholic or really functional CBD-related beverages, food products, et cetera. So CBD-infused products. In this sector would be CBD-infused drinks, right? So as
I think what's interesting about Dads and Dudes and the George Washingtons, if you want to share that with them, is that it's actually an alcohol beer that has a TTB formulation approval. And the question is, how did that happen? Right? So in 2015-16, Mason went about producing it, making submissions to the TTB, and shockingly, through our due diligence in the acquisition process, you go on the TTB's website, and we can actually find documentation where the TTB is saying, can you prove there's no THC in this product? And then, a certificate of analysis is there showing there's no THC in the product, and they get an approval. Well, I think those of you who have been around for a while know that in late 2016, the DEA came back out and said, hey, wait a minute, CBD is Schedule 1. Well, at that point, and correct me where I'm wrong, Mason, is that the TTB tried to revoke the approval. And Mason engaged legally with the TTB with the help of the hemp industry, and the TTB walked away. And today, his formulation's approval is approved, and we can go on the website and actually see that it says sativa is part of the
It was the original name, yep, sativa.
Sativa, and it says right there, formulation approved. So I think products like that, where the FDA's got some things they have to figure out, but the TTB's already spoken on this formula. So now it's just about nationalization and doing it in the proper manner.
And regulation is not always a bad thing, right? I think it's imperative in a new industry that leaders in the industry really take the lead role in understanding regulation and making sure that they're being responsible in terms of the total production that happens. So regulation is not a bad thing. It also creates barriers to entry. With challenges, come opportunities. And for those companies like what Mike and Victor put together, I think there's a long opportunity spectrum that really can differentiate themselves versus others. A brewery like ours, by itself, trying to be a craft brewery and then trying to get into this space, man, that's a big step for someone like us to jump into. Kudos to Mason for figuring out the CBD side, but really thinking about THC and how it evolves, that's a big step. So I think the barriers to entry are something that that not a lot of people have been talking about, but for those folks that can put it all together, it seems like a powerful opportunity to grow a new industry.
And you're totally right that regulation can be a beneficial thing, but the best way to steer it is by being proactive and getting out ahead of it. I think the possibility, the opportunity that beverages has, especially when we're talking about adult beverages, is a clear vector, as I was saying earlier, into mainstream consumption, because the consumption habits exist. People know how to drink alcoholic beers, right? So there's a clear vector there. And then the question becomes, as leaders in the industry, as this industry develops, how do you set the codes in terms of dosing, right? So can there be basically a code of what the proper dosing for X size container is, or whatever analog? So those sorts of things are going to be important, and it can come from within or it can come from without. So, as you were saying, it should be part of the discussion as these products develop.
Totally agree. We're actually flying. I'm flying up to meet with the Cannabis Czar for California on Tuesday next week, just to start those conversations about establishing standards that consumers can actually start to trust a product and other products in a category, that they're all going to do the same thing, they're going to have the same effect. Maybe it's a different flavor, maybe someone does a better job, but at least the effects will be the same, and you get responsible production, responsible dosing, something consumers can actually count on.
Well, let's bring the discussion back to the panel topic, which is that, what's the effect of cannabis beverages on the traditional adult beverage market? Do we see a differentiation, or, what are the differences we see sort of on the THC versus CBD adult beverages, its effect on the traditional beverage market?
Well, I'll just jump right in. At this Beer Insights Conference, second day was Wines and Spirits Insights Conference. Probably 500 industry leaders at that. So we had Bill Koch, Sam Adams there. An hour and a half of each day was dedicated to cannabis beverages. So at least from that perspective, there's interest, there's more than interest on the topic. I think one of the key things is that, as was discussed, it's complex. To actually get the science right is very complex to negotiate the regulatory
get the
hurdles.
cost down.
And then there's a choke point, obviously, which is distribution through dispensaries right now. So I think that what the effect is on the broader alcoholic beverage, adult beverage industry, my view, too early to call it through numbers. But my job over the past 10 years was head of corporate strategy for some of the biggest spirits firms in the world. So my job was to think ahead, and you just see the broad strokes. There is going to be convergence. It makes sense. People will be looking for lower calorie, good for you products that still get them elevated and that allow them to participate in a convivial moment with friends. It will impact.
Yeah, and at that conference last week, we heard a lot of conversation, a lot of topics, dialogue around Gen Z, right? What is Gen Z going to be looking for? So to your point about long looks down the road as a corporate strategy, is that what's coming? If millennials are doing this, what's Gen Z going to do? And that's where big alcohol is looking today. And then for us to be leaders, we have to understand that as well, and we have to evolve in that direction at a greater pace, so that we seize a greater market opportunity as an industry.
Yeah, I think there is certainly cannibalization in the marketplace, and as Victor said, I agree. It's too early to tell what that cannibalization looks like. I know there's been some studies out there that have shown some impact, but there's nothing like the growth now in the consumables that I think is going to be a direct corollary to traditional beer. But I don't think beer is dead either, right? And, especially if anybody wants a Green Flash beer, it's help yourself. But the craft beer industry is unique. I think it's very innovative, and I think it'll continue to be innovative. I think big beer will continue to, the Bud Lights of the world, the Miller Lights of the world, they'll continue to innovate, and they've got a product that is absolutely socially acceptable. But they're going to be under some pressure, and the moment that the dispensary model winds up no longer being necessary or no longer being required, that's a game changer. That's a big change. So I don't know where where that cannibalization between now and dispensary elimination or moderation comes into play. But at some point in the future, it's a big challenge for larger alcohol producers, and that's why you see the recent investment acquisitions that folks have gone into here in the recent past.
But if you take it back to this forum, right, the investment forum, the actions of some of the big beer players is clear, and having been at corporate strategy and M&A, what we can all take advantage of is the fact that those big companies, they're slow. They're slow. I was there. And so you have the innovation team, but by the time it flows up and it's going to go through board approval, it's a long, long path. So putting some chips down with some of the beverage entrepreneurs, I think, if you take I'm not going to say the long view, but as this product normalizes, which we see happening at a much quicker pace than anybody could have anticipated, adult beverages will be part of the repertoire. They will be. They're a small segment, but they're one of the quickest growing segments right now.
And not all beverages are created equal either. Brands are going to be a clear winner longer term.
Yeah, and we were talking about this at breakfast and a little bit at drinks last night, is when you think about the big companies and their process and the amount of time it takes for them to act, right, which Victor is speaking to, and then we look at what Constellation did, and if you broke that down in it's a really interesting question comes out of it. So in 2015 they formed Green Star. In 2017 they formed Green Star, and then they made an investment in October of $191 million into the Canadian market, and then 10 months later they made a $4 billion investment. And the question that comes out whenever I run that through my head is, what did they see, right? So I know some people at Constellation, they said, hey, we spent $191 million to learn. We didn't understand it. We don't know it. What did they see? Why did they push in $4 billion, right? It's a really good question.
With all the investor members in our audience, maybe this is a question for any of the panelists, but more specific to you, Michael. What are some metrics or some of the due diligence questions that investors should ask when they're looking at some of these beverage plays or beverage entrepreneurs entering the market? If Victor and the fellow audience are convinced that the beverage market is someone they want to invest in, what should they watch out for?
Well, I think the first things you're going to want to look for is understand how the companies are structured. So Victor's going to love this because I got this from Victor back last year. We started out with Victor. I asked him if he'd join our board, and as we began talking, we discovered that there was an opportunity for him to work with us. But understanding where the company's going to go and how they're structured. So how are you structured as an organization? So if big alcohol came in, do they have to buy everything? Can they buy part of it, what they want? They don't want to be a cultivator, right? So structure. The second question is going to be scale. How are you going to scale, right? So do you have the ability, do you have the vision, do you have the resource, do you have the management to scale the business, right? So this is going to sound like a plug. I don't mean it to be a plug, but Victor is the latest addition to our team to bring global beverage experience into the company. So last year we had Mike Lorelli, former president of PepsiCo East, join our organization on our board. He was responsible for $1.5 billion in revenue. This year we've brought Victor on. We've brought another Constellation executive on. We've got another big alcohol executive who's going to join our board in March, right? So can you scale? So we're going to scale by leadership. And then you have to ask yourself, how can you scale by manufacture? How can you scale production? Because beverages and CPG, it's a volume business. You're not going to make a lot of money at $4, $2 a clip, right? So those are three very important questions: leadership, scale, and structure. And if a company has done those things right, I think everything you're going to find behind it is going to line up.
Great. Well, we're running out of time now. Thank you very much to our panelists, and have a nice day.